What's good YouTube? Welcome to my channel, Large and Conditioning. Natural hypertrophy called power building an abomination. I think he's wrong about power building, and I will give you some reasons why I think it's not an abomination and why it's actually a very good way of training, but he very much disagrees. He says you end up with a spider physique. Reason number one, and this is probably the biggest difference between people who are strength athletes and people who are more bodybuilding orientated, like natural hypertrophy. Us strength athletes, we focus on our performance between sessions to sessions. We will do isolation movements or assisted movements just like a bodybuilder would, but we do not do it with the sole intent of training till failure, because that creates an over amount of creating a fatigue that could potentially be very harming to our performance leading into the sessions to come, which also could harm the training block as a whole. We are very much focused on what our performance looks like on a week-to-week basis, and whereas the bodybuilder, he doesn't care. It doesn't matter to him if he can deadlift 200 pounds or 800 pounds. Doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how big the muscles get, and that's the only thing you care about as a bodybuilder like natural hypertrophy. But we focus on our fatigue management, which results in better performance. He does not. Both powerlifters and strongmen train in this type of fashion. We train with the big compound movements first and then some isolation work after. An example for me would be log pressing, then some strict OHP, then some rear and side delt work with some triceps work followed in terms of isolation. And these isolation exercises may not be trained ultra hard, may not be going to failure, because there's frankly no point, as just a few days later I will have pressing once again. I don't need the extra fatigue that it could create of training these assistant muscles in terms of going to failure. It just doesn't work. So this is a very big difference between a strength athlete and a power builder or a bodybuilder. As a bodybuilder, you will simply just train this to failure because you want to maximize your hypertrophy gains. We as strength athletes, we don't focus on our isolation movements in the same fashion, but it's still an extremely good way to train. The power building way of training is used by pretty much any strength athlete worldwide, because we focus on the big movements first, then build our weaker areas after. So this is a very good way to train. It's not an abomination. Reason number three, and something natural hypertrophy does not address. We as natties, our strength reflect our growth. If you are going to add 20 kilos to your OHP, you will without a shadow of a doubt have grown bigger. You will be just broader. It's just you cannot get around it as a natural, no matter how your weight slice. If you can do 50 kg for 5 reps and then you add 20 kilos to that, you're going to be bigger. It's not going to happen otherwise. You're not going to just stay in the same size and same weight. It will happen. The idea with power building is that you do 1 or 2 heavy compound movements first, and then you move on to isolation or more stable exercises in terms of assistant. But as our natural hypertrophy points out, that he has seen power builders neglect the last bit. But that's a people problem, not a training style problem. And we can't just put a people problem onto a style of training and then say this training style is bad because of the people over here. Does not work. Reason number 4. Oftentimes the people who choose the style of a power building will either be a strength athlete or realize they don't have the genetics to look properly aesthetic, at least of what they see on the internet. And this is quite frankly what most people will look at and be like, well, I can't look like that, so I might as well not even try. Then they may move on towards power building or something entirely completely different. And you will realize this relatively early. You can see this in just a few short years of your training. And most natties, they are not going to look much different 5 to 7 years into the training compared to 10 years after that, simply because the amount of muscle growth that you can gain will be greatly diminished. It is stated that after around 5 years you can gain 1 to 2 pounds per year from that point onward. That would be, if on the high end, 2 pounds per year for 10 years. That will be 20 pounds total. The chances of you gaining 20 pounds in the span of 10 years after your first 5 years is very small, because even so, in the first few years after your first 5 years, that will still get less and less and less. The point of diminishing returns. You're going to get less and less out of it. So even if you have a look right now and 10 years go by, people who haven't seen you in the past 10 years will hardly be able to tell the difference. If you gained 10, 15, maybe even 20 pounds, that will you probably be able to tell. But 10 pounds, people are not going to notice.